Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. We're going to start out with a brief mention of Bob Norris, who died recently at the age of 90. He was the original Marlboro Man. That's one of the most famous advertising campaigns in history, and according to KTLA Los Angeles, the rancher and philanthropist best known for playing the original Marlboro Man has died after a life spent not smoking. Bob Norris died at the age of 90 in Pikes Peak Hospice in Colorado Springs, Colorado. If any man could be described in 3 words, for Bob they would be the real deal. His solid authenticity, whether astride a horse, sitting in a boardroom, mentoring a child, or sharing a moment with a friend, was his personal and professional brand. No doubt it was these qualities, along with his tall, ruggedly handsome, lanky good looks, that landed him the unexpected role of the first Marlboro Man on television, the statement on the ranch's website said. Norris, who was never a smoker, was featured in the commercials for 14 years, according to the statement. He abandoned the advertising campaign when he felt that he was setting a poor example for his children, the statement said. Norris was a member of the Board of Trustees for the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum, also known as the Cowboy Hall of Fame, the ranch's website said. Well, we're going to move on to another familiar image of that era with Maria Perego, who died recently at the age of 95. Maria Perego was an Italian puppeteer who created Topo Gigio. And if you're of the age and you watched Ed Sullivan, then you must have seen Topo Gigio, who was a little mouse who was controlled by rods, and he had an ongoing act with Ed Sullivan himself. In fact, next to Elvis Presley and the Beatles, I'm not sure there was a more popular act on Ed Sullivan than Topo Gigio. And Topo Gigio's famous line was, "Eddie, kiss me goodnight." Here's my man, John Biner, the great impressionist, doing a little bit of Eddie and Topo Gigio.
Now, my little Italian friend from Italy, Topo Gigio. Come on, rush out here. Oh, hi there, Topo.
Hello, Eddie.
What is it? Hurry up, what is it?
Kiss me good night.
We don't have time. Let's hear it. Are you all right, little son of a gun? All right.
John Biner did a great Ed Sullivan. Here's the real thing. Ed Sullivan and Topo Gigio.
I suppose in the 18-year history of our show, we've never had any star with one such affectionate acceptance as our little Italian mouse, Topo Gigio. Tonight, I'm delighted, and I know you're delighted, to welcome Topo Gigio back from Italy to New York City. So let's have a nice welcome for little Topo. Welcome back. Welcome back, Topo.
I haven't seen you in such a long, long time. Eddie?
Yeah?
Quick, kiss me hello. Eddie, I'm so excited.
Why, what are you up to now?
I'm a writer. Look, I'm wearing glasses,
Yeah?
and see, pencils, papers. I'm going right to the top, and nothing can stop me.
Now, what makes you think you're a writer?
Because I already wrote a mystery.
What's it about?
I don't know.
You don't know?
That's the mystery.
Oh.
It will sell millions. I'll be rich. I'll be famous, Eddie.
And you really think that this will happen?
What do I know? I'm only a little mouse.
Oh, I noticed, Topo, that all you ever think about is to get rich and famous.
Well, Eddie, I'm only a little mouse, but I'm a smart little mouse.
And you better learn right now, Topo, success only comes with a lot of hard work.
Eddie, you're a newspaper man.
Mm-hmm.
Do you work hard to make the news?
Well, I don't make the news. I just put it together for my column.
And on your show, you don't write the songs and dances.
No, I don't.
You just put the show together.
That's right.
You know, Eddie, you're a pretty smart little mouse yourself.
Topo, right now, it's time for bed.
Oh, Eddie, all right. Kiss me good night first.
Yes, Topo. Good night.
Tag me in.
That's Topo Gigio. You probably won't see an act like that on television again. Well, we're going to move on to Peter Collier, who died recently at the age of 80. Fascinating guy. Peter Collier was a member of the New Left in the 60s. He was a big-time radical. His running mate in those days was a guy named David Horowitz, and those guys were big-time anti-war, peace, love, Marxist hippies. But then they had a sort of a Damascene conversion in the mid-70s. And from the New Left, they became part of the New Right. A lot of their conversion had to do with an episode with the Black Panthers in the early 70s. Horowitz was working for the Black Panthers out in Oakland, and a woman that he knew was also working with them, and she was murdered mysteriously. David Horowitz remained convinced that it was a Black Panther killing, but they sort of covered it up in his opinion, and that led him to question his values, as did Peter Collier, and so the two became authors together. Together they wrote biographies of the Rockefeller family, the Roosevelts, and the Kennedy family, all very good books, especially the Kennedy family book. Peter Collier also wrote books about courage and about Medal of Honor winners, so you know I have a soft spot for that. Another influential book he wrote with David Horowitz was Destructive Generation, and their former lefty colleagues dumped all over them. New York Times didn't like to review their stuff and gave them a shot whenever they could, as did some of the other liberal outlets, but these guys stood their ground. David Horowitz is still standing his ground. Here's Peter Collier to talk about the book Destructive Generation, and you'll get a good idea of where he wound up after being a hardcore lefty in the 1960s.
Peter Collier, co-author of the book Destructive Generation, Second Thoughts on the 60s. We'll ask you to tell us what that title means.
Well, it's an attempt to talk about our political generation, my political generation, which was the generation of the New Left, and really to evaluate the history of that movement. And it's done from the point of view of myself and my colleague David Horowitz, who were new leftists in those days, self-defined radicals. And what we have tried to do here is to counter really what we feel is the euphoric kind of history of the 60s that has been written recently by fellow refugees of the radical left, and attempt to really evaluate the destructive impact that the radical left had in that time, and to talk about how the 60s is really being used as a kind of all-purpose metaphor for our own time in an attempt to bring the 60s kind of radical styles back to life again. And we really feel that would be a terrible tragedy, given the fact that the 60s, while it was in a way the best of times for good sex, good dope, good vibes generally, was also the worst of times. It was time when we assaulted every citadel of authority quite flagrantly, ranging from the nuclear family to the very consensual nature of the way by which a country makes its policies, and really, in a way, destroyed the immune system by attacking authority so capriciously, attacked the immune system by which a society defends itself, and led to kind of all sorts of opportunistic diseases that we face today. So that basically is what we mean by destructive generation.
He and Horowitz call themselves second thoughters because of their conversion, and I sort of know where they're coming from. I'm a little younger than them, but I sort of saw the same phenomenon they did. The thing I got a kick out of was in the 60s and early 70s, they wrote for Ramparts, which was a real left-wing journal. Collier was an editor at Ramparts for a while, and they dumped on the CIA, and they dumped on the Pentagon and the president and all that stuff. But the only time they ever got in legal trouble was when they advised kids how to make free long-distance phone calls, and AT&T threatened to take them to court. Of all the organizations they tried to undermine when they were with the left, AT&T was the only one who fought back at him. This is one of my favorite things that he wrote. One of the few saving graces of age is a deeper perspective on the passions of youth. Looking back on the left's revolutionary enthusiasms of the last 25 years, we have painfully learned what should have been obvious all along, that we live in an imperfect world that is bettered only with great difficulty and easily made worse, much worse. This is a conservative assessment, but on the basis of a half a lifetime's experience, it seems about right. Peter Collier and his friend David Horowitz, always the counterculture. Well, we're going to move on now to another painful one for me. We've lost another member of the fabulous green and gold of the 60s. Another Packer legend is down. This time it's Zeke Bratkowski, who died recently at the age of 88. There's a saying here in Chicago that the most popular person in Chicago is the backup quarterback, because the Bears have not had a really good quarterback since the days of Sid Luckman, and that was in the 1940s. Well, the Packers have had some great quarterbacks, and they've also had a great backup quarterback, and the greatest backup quarterback of all was Zeke Bratkowski. He was number 12 with the Packers, and ironically, the Bears drafted him originally. He was a great quarterback at Georgia, one of the best of his time. And when the Bears got him, he was originally the backup for George Blanda. You know, I said the Bears didn't have any good quarterbacks. That's not true. They had three great quarterbacks in the late 40s and early 50s, Bobby Lang, George Blanda, and Johnny Lujack. The thing is, they gave them all up, and they all went on to become great quarterbacks. After Blanda got hurt, Bratkowski backed him up, and he threw too many interceptions. He came back and he threw a bunch of interceptions with Ed Brown, who became the backup quarterback a little later on for the Bears. It's like the Bears got a curse on quarterbacks or something, I don't know. Anyway, Bratkowski went on to play a couple years with the Rams. He was a starter for a while. He didn't do that well. but the Packers picked him up in 1963. Lombardi picked him up to be the backup for Bart Starr, paid only $100 for him, if you can imagine that, and that's where he really thrived. We just did the Bart Starr podcast, and I refer you to it. He and Bart Starr lived close to each other in De Pere, and they were good friends, and Bratkowski was the perfect backup. No ego, always willing to learn, always willing to perform under pressure, and he actually won a huge playoff game for them against the Colts in 1965. Very memorable and controversial game. Bart Starr was out for the Packers, Johnny Unitas was out for the Colts, so Bratkowski played, and the Colts had to call on running back Tom Manny to play quarterback because their backup quarterback Quazza was also out. The Packers won the game on an overtime field goal by Don Chandler, although his tying field goal with less than 2 minutes to go was actually wide and was called good. So he was part of the 2 Super Bowl teams, 66 and 67, and he's also been inducted into the Green Bay Packer Hall of Fame. The first Super Bowl 1966 season was actually played in 1967, and at the 50th anniversary he came back to Lambeau Field and he was asked what held the Green Bay Packers together for so long, because so many of them stayed close friends long after their playing days.
I guess it was the cement that Coach Lombardi, spiritual cement, I guess you'd call it. It's like we just saw him yesterday and played yesterday. And obviously we're much better now than we were then.
He was a self-deprecating guy. Final irony is when his career was over, he became an assistant coach with the Packers, and then he became an assistant coach with the Bears. Head coach Abe Gibram made him the offensive coordinator, and for a while he promoted him to backup quarterback. But Bratkowski never got in any games for the Bears in 1973, which I suppose is a good thing for him. But we'll miss you, number 12. Well, I want to thank my producer and IT genius, Sid Tapp, so we're going to close tonight with a brief mention of Robert Freeman, who died recently at the age of 82. He was the Beatles photographer in their early years, and he shot the iconic cover of their album Meet the Beatles in late 1963. Matt Schudel of the Washington Post describes it this way. In August 1963, when the Beatles were starting to take off in popularity on their way to becoming the band that defined a generation, they were performing in Bournemouth, England. Their producer, George Martin, called to say he needed a photograph for the cover of a new album. The band's manager, Brian Epstein, asked Robert Freeman if he could arrange a photo shoot. The next day, in the dining room of a Bournemouth hotel, Freeman captured the group in a series of black and white portraits that helped define the Beatles' image for a generation of fans. Since the photograph was needed urgently, I had to improvise a studio situation in the hotel, Freeman wrote in his 2003 book, The Beatles, A Private View. There was a broad side light from the windows and a deep maroon curtain that could be pulled behind them to create a dark background. They came down at midday wearing their black polo neck sweaters. It seemed natural to photograph them in black and white wearing their customary dark clothes. It gave unity to the image. There was no makeup, hairdresser, or stylist, just myself, the Beatles, and a camera. The resulting image, used for the 1963 British album With the Beatles and for the 1964 U.S. release Meet the Beatles, showed the 4 band members looking directly at the camera without smiling. The light from the dining room windows left their faces half in shadow. The portraits appear so focused and precise that many people have assumed Freeman created a montage from 4 separate photographs. In fact, all 4 members of the band are in the same unretouched image. Will we ever forget that photo? Washington-based photography curator Chris Murray said in an interview, "It heralded the beginning of the British invasion. You're listening to the impact of that music for the first time, then you look at Robert Freeman's portrait of the Beatles, it was magical." As a final tribute to Robert Freeman, we're not going to play a Beatles song because, hey, YouTube will cut it anyway. But we will play a Lennon and McCartney song that they gave away to Billy J. Kramer with the Dakotas around the time this photograph was taken. Paul McCartney had written it several years before, and they recorded it, but it never made it to America. It's considered the first song they gave away, and in the United States it was the B-side to another Lennon and McCartney giveaway, From a Window. And I think it's one of McCartney's best songs, and many Beatles fans have never even heard it. So let's take a chance with a pretty faithful cover so that you may get a chance to hear it if they don't cut it. This is I'll Be On My Way.
The sun is fading away, that's the end of the day. As the June light turns to moonlight, I'll be on my way. Just one kiss and I'll go, don't hide the tears that don't show. As the June light turns to moonlight, I'll be on my way.